7th, 2019 will come to order, and the clerk will please call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Schron. Mr. Schron is absent today. Ms. Conwell. Ms. Conwell is absent today. Mr. Jones. Here. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown is absent at the moment. Ms. Stevens. Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Ms. Baker. Here. Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Tuma.
Here.
Mr. Gallagher.
Here.
And Council President Brady.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Do we have anybody signed in?
Mr. Will Tarter. Mr. Tarter has also provided handouts for council members, which I put on the dais at each one of your spots.
Thank you very much. Welcome to the committee. You may proceed.
Thank you and good afternoon. Thank you and good afternoon, Chairman Miller, Council President Brady, Vice President Jones, and members of County Council. My name is Will Tarter, and I'm a citizen of Broadview Heights. As a reminder, I don't speak on behalf of my employer or any civic organization. Since the committee meeting 2 weeks ago, I have gotten many answers to the questions that I posed, and I want to salute the Office of Budget and Management. In summary, the amount of capital maintenance money allotted for Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse from the $23 million plus interest that was paid in 2015, plus today's request of $40 million in interest, even with the proposed refinancing, the estimated amount of expenditure on Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse totals at least $86.4 million. And remember, each facility only gets $86.6 million conservatively. This is syntax money that was supposed to last from 2015 until 2035. Instead, assuming that the county's allocation of the syntax money for Progressive Field and Cleveland Browns Stadium stays the same, the entire Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse allocation would have been exhausted in 4 years. I've spoken with some leaders, and one of the responses I received is, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. The problem is, at the moment, there is no bridge. It's a cliff, a fiscal cliff. And it's not enough to say, well, we're on the hook for the maintenance. As the protector of the purse strings, I believe that council has the authority to use this opportunity to get some much needed clarity. First, work with the administration, Gateway, the Cavaliers, and Indians to precisely define what a reasonable reimbursement timeframe is according to the lease agreement. My legislative proposal would get the money back to the Cavaliers in 4.5 years using a 1% increase in the hotel bed tax. If that's too long, then let's figure out what is a reasonable expectation. So when the county gets a request in the future, the county knows exactly how much time they have to find a solution. Second, for the $40 million request currently before you, you can then identify alternative solutions that fit within that reasonable time frame. In 3 years, when a request comes to Gateway and thus the county, and the syntax allocation has been exhausted, if this bond issuance goes through, then what? What prevents the team from saying that the county is in breach of contract? And would the lease then be broken? So in my opinion, council has 3 options. Option number 1 is pay back the money as the syntax dollars come in, and that may possibly face legal liability, so I wouldn't recommend that based on the previous committee meeting. Option number 2 is don't issue the bonds, save the $21 million in interest, and identify a reasonable reimbursement time frame. You can then come up with some sort of legislative solution that's similar to my proposal that may meet the reasonable reimbursement time frame. Option number 3 is to issue the bonds and front the money. But in a few years, I'm concerned that Gateway and by extension the county will face legal liability and possibly the lease being broken. Plus the facility will be pushing 30 years old at that point. So let's find alternative methods to fund our obligations and not make a short-term decision that would have devastating long-term consequences for taxpayers. I thank the chairman for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Has anybody else signed in?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're going to now move on to the continuation of this discussion with item number 4, and the 2 items are related, and if there's no objection, I would like to hear the 2 items concurrently and ask that the 2 items be read into the record, and noting that Ms. Brown is joining the meeting.
Resolution number 2019-0125, providing for the issuance and sale of taxable general obligation bonds in a maximum aggregate principal amount of $40 million to advance refund all of the county's outstanding excise tax revenue bonds, Series 2015, originally issued for the purpose of paying the costs of constructing, renovating, improving, or repairing sports facilities, including specifically major capital repairs to such sports facilities, and reimbursing the county for costs incurred by the county in connection with such construction, renovation, improvement, or repairs, to pay capitalized interest on the bonds, and to fund a reserve fund, and to pay the costs of issuance in connection therewith. And resolution number 2019-0126, providing for the issuance and sale of general obligation bonds in a maximum aggregate principal amount of $40,500,000 to provide funds for the purpose of paying the costs of constructing, renovating, improving, or repairing sports facilities, including specifically major capital repairs to such sports facilities, and reimbursing the county for costs incurred by the county in connection with such construction, renovation, improvement, or repairs of sports facilities, together with all necessary appurtenances and work incidental thereto, to pay capital interest on the bonds and to pay the costs of issuance in connection therewith.
Thank you very much. Those items are now before the committee. My understanding is that there is a short presentation from the administration or the Cavaliers. Please
Chairman
proceed.
Miller, I'd like to thank you guys again for the opportunity to present these financings to the council. Again, my name is Robert Franz, Bob Franz. I'm with Stiefel. I am the county's financial advisor. In the last meeting, there was a good amount of discussion about the different projects and about the overview and funding mechanisms for the debt to be issued, and there were some questions about tying the original projects back to what we're doing now and how does it all look. So in the presentation that we have before you today, the first page here was what was presented both in 2014 and in last meeting. What we did here is, what we did here is we put those same projects, so working from left to right, we put those same projects together with the original preliminary estimated expense ranges, the low range and the high range, the project status, and then how was it funded? Was it funded with 2015 bonds? And if it was, what was the number? And if it was funded with the 2019 bonds, what's the number that was approved by Gateway today, as we're funding the projects today? There were a little bit of inconsistencies between what the projects were called. So for example, in item number 6, the original project was for multi-level seating space replacement, updates, and reconfigurations. That has now been rephrased as retractable seating. So it's the same project, but just a different name. So we wanted to, again, foot it back to the original project. And then on the far right, the difference between what was funded, what will be funded with the current issuance, and versus the high range of the original budget number. So in short, we were able to foot it all back. We worked pretty extensively with both Gateway and the Cavs team to put this together. As Mr. Komorowski explained last meeting, there was one project which he mentioned, which is still yet to be determined, which was escalators. It was vertical transportation, which was escalators and elevators. And then the other was an arena bowl curtain replacement. Those are the only 2 items that have yet to be identified for a funding source from the original projects. All other projects will be funded with either the 2019 bonds or with the 2015 bonds. There was one additional item added to the list, which we talked about last time in last meeting, which is the ADA restroom compliant, bringing the ADA, all the restrooms being compliant with ADA regs. And actually, we were able to remove 3 items, project 2, 3, and 4, because of kind of the synergies with the transformation project. So there was, so in short, we took 3 projects off, added 1 new one, and that was it. And we're still within that $55 to $65 million budget range as presented in 2014. So I don't know if there's any specific questions about the projects that either myself can answer or Mr. Komorowski can answer. I also presented a 2-page overview last time that on my fault wasn't correctly presented to you guys in a timely manner. So I wanted to make sure that, you know, if there are any questions about that, about what we're funding, how we're funding it, that you have the opportunity to discuss that, to ask questions. So if there's any questions on either the funding overview or the projects, I would be happy to help explain those, or Mr. Komorowski would as well.
Mr. Franz, do you have a cost estimate on the 2 items that you mentioned were not programmed in so far?
I am Len Komorowski, CEO of the Cavaliers and Rock'n'Roll Ridge Fieldhouse. Relative to, those are projects at this point that we haven't, you know, they're not at their end of their useful life, so we're not quite there, but they would be much lesser or smaller projects in the scope of what we're talking about here. Relative to vertical transportation would be more as it relates to refurbishment, and then the curtains are another project. But at this juncture, you know, we're not at a point where we're going to be pushing forward with those at this current time.
Okay. And do you have an estimate on what the cost savings is on the refunding on an annual basis and over the life of the bonds?
In the numbers that are presented in that 2-page overview, we're estimating about $1.5 million of annual savings, totaling to about $12 million over the life of the bonds and cash flow savings.
Okay, and we have Mr. Franz here, we have Mr. Komorowski, we also have Ms. Keenan from Budget and Management. I would open the floor to any questions from my colleagues at this time. Okay.
Thank you, Chairman Miller. In the report that you provided us, it does give us a figure for those 2 items that were just inquired about by my colleague, Councilman Miller. Is that estimate inaccurate, or do you anticipate it going higher? I think it's item 5 and item 22.
Yeah, those are, they're within an approximate range, but I, you know, wouldn't expect them to be any significantly higher, and there may even be some savings, but that's just an estimate based on current setting.
Okay, and you said they haven't reached their expired their useful life.
Right, we're able to extend their life as they currently are, and so with all of the systems, we work with Gateway ourselves our team to make sure that we can get the maximum use out of each item, and then until it's to a point that it's reached the end of its useful life.
Which we are clearly grateful for. Do you have an anticipated time? Is it going to be next year? Do you think 2 years, 3 years that we'll be looking at those items?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know, if we can't, nothing in what I would say the foreseeable future, but we just monitor that on an annualized basis.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question, relative to the items that were removed, and pardon me for not knowing this, how are those funded? Were they funded?
Part of the transformation. So it ended up being something that we could encompass as we went through our process with where we were addressing those particular areas of the building in construction.
Okay, I would note that Ms. Stevens has joined the meeting, and I would ask again if there's any questions from any of my colleagues. Ms. Stevens.
I'd just like to thank Mr. Franz and Mr. Komorowski for meeting with me last week to go over in detail my questions because as the rookie on the team, I did not have the history, In addition, legal counsel to Gateway met with me to explain the history and the separation of the income streams. And so it was incredibly helpful in getting me caught up with everyone else. Again, thank you.
Anything else, Ms. Baker?
I'm just trying to make sense out of the 7 through 18 HVAC project in progress. You have a bracket there, and then you have a 2019 of 27 million, and then you have in parentheses under and over of 11.2. What is, I don't understand, what are you trying to say there?
Yes, thank you for the question. At our last committee of the whole, our Senior Vice President of Facility Operations, Anthony Bonavita, had commented relative to, we had made a estimate when we went through the process with County Council back in early 2014. The request was to make an estimate. And that was before we actually had a chance to actually go in, when you're looking at HVAC system permeating throughout the entirety of the building, and the scope and magnitude of that particular project. And after having a chance to, one, go through that in its entirety, two, just even the cost of time over the period of time which it's actually in process of being done now, it turned out to be a more significant project than we had anticipated back when we were making what we call a quick estimate at that point in time.
So, if I may, so we were off back in 2014, 11.2 million in the HVAC? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, yes. So in certain cases, in that case, it was a very significant project, but the scope and magnitude was more than we had expected once we got into the building. In other cases, we've actually realized savings, as we get into it. And that's really certainly our effort as we go through this process, working with our partners at Gateway as to how we can do this most effectively, efficiently for the long term.
If I may just follow, is there any other significant line item that we are ballparking and could cost more that we now know may or may not at this time in 2019?
No, at this point, these are projects that have either been finished, are in progress, or being done very short term and have already been costed out.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Well, hearing none, I would like to make a recommendation to the committee. Mr. Tarter suggested 3 options, but I actually support a 4th option, which is that we should go ahead now and issue these bonds, but at the same time, there's a number of financial questions that we're dealing with, and the possibility of raising the bed tax is under discussion, and the possibility of future refunding and adjusting arrangements down the road is always a possibility, and we should keep our minds open to that. But I think that for now, the maintenance of these facilities is a collaborative arrangement of which we are a partner. The Cavaliers have fronted much of these repairs, even though we're legally obligated to pay for them by contract. And I think for us not to move promptly at this time would be inconsistent with being a good partner in this process. So if my colleagues agree, I would ask if anybody is ready to make a motion to refer both items to the full council for second reading suspension. It's been moved and seconded to refer resolutions 2019-0125 and 2019-0126 to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. They are on tonight's agenda, pending referral from committee. Is there any further discussion?
Excuse me, Mr. Chair. I heard Ms. Stevens make the first motion, but I did not hear the second.
Actually, the first motion was from the council president, and Ms. Stevens was second, and so will be considered the seconder. Okay. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The items are so recommended.
Thank you.
Okay, I am now going to turn the gavel over to the council president to continue the meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're at item 6 on the schedule of the Committee of the Whole. We have executive session today. All meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio open meeting laws. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside of the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council's Committee of the Whole will go into executive session to discuss pending or imminent litigation. During this time, our live stream will be down, and we ask all those not needed for the executive session to remain in council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent room A. Will re-enter the meeting once the executive session has ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session for the purpose of discussing pending or imminent litigation? So moved. Been moved and seconded. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Moving to executive session. Mr. Jones? Yes. Ms. Brown? Ms. Stevens? Yes. Ms. Simon is still absent. Ms. Baker? Yes. Mr. Miller? Yes. Mr. Tuma?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher? Yes. Council President Brady?
Yes.
Motion carries.
The ayes have it. We'll be meeting in executive session. The meeting of the Committee of the Whole, and now back on record. We're at item 6, miscellaneous business. There is none, right? And so the Committee of the Whole is adjourned until 5 o'clock for the council's regular meeting.